Welcome, everybody. I'm Heather Bhandari, adjunct lecturer in visual arts, and tonight we are going to do things a little differently. Shake it up for some of you who come to all the Visiting Artists lecture series. I'm going to do the announcements, and then Charlie Usadi is going to, a senior in visual arts who is very amazing, is going to introduce our esteemed guest, Doron Langberg. But before we go any further, I'd like to begin with a living land acknowledgement. Brown University is built on what is now called College Hill, part of the unceded ancestral homelands of the Narragansett Indian tribe. Indigenous people from many nations, near and far, live, study, and work in Providence today. The amplification of Native voices and histories is crucial to rectifying the many violent legacies of colonialism, and we gratefully acknowledge the ongoing critical contributions of Indigenous people within this university, across our state, region, and country. I would like to acknowledge that we are also connected by a campus that relied on the African slave trade in the Americas, and that there are buildings on campus constructed by enslaved people. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustained and enriched the stolen land we are speaking from today. These acknowledgements and much more commit us to a lifetime of decolonial and anti-racist work. A few more things to note before we begin. First, please do not record this event. We value and respect the IP of our visiting artists, and we will post the recording on our YouTube account with their permission. Still shots are great, and you can tag at Brown Visual Arts and at Doron Langberg. Second, after Doron's presentation, there will be a Q&A. There are 2 microphones, one in each of the aisles. You can just come up and ask your question directly. It's expected that everyone be kind, courteous, and respectful with their questions, and 1 question per person. Now, I'd like to thank Ed Osborne, chair of the department, Winnie Gear, CJ Liu, and Media Services for facilitating this evening's event. And I would love to thank Charlie Usadi, an enthusiastic and engaged senior who first brought Doron's work to my attention in the fall of 2023. Thank you, Charlie, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you for the kind words, Heather. It means a lot. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 4th lecture in our 2024-2025 academic year. I'm Charlie Usadi, a senior concentrator in the department, and I am so honored to introduce you all to tonight's speaker, Doron Langberg. Born in 1985 in Yokneam Moshava, Israel, Doron Langberg lives and works in New York City. He received his MFA from Yale University and holds a BFA from the University of Pennsylvania and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Doron's paintings center a core thread of intimacy in which queer identity, experience, and connection take center stage. Often working directly from life, this work depicts himself, friends, family, and lovers. From intimate portraits in domestic spaces to neon-lit clubs to expansive landscapes, Doron's carefully rendered figures at moments dissolve into their prismatic surroundings. These works push boundaries of traditional portraiture in both subject matter and style, offering new relationships between the viewer and the figure. Langberg has had solo museum presentations at Kunsthal Rotterdam and the Rubell Museum Miami, and has been included in numerous group exhibitions, including the ICA Boston, the Frick Collection, the ICA Miami, the Hill Art Foundation, the Flag Foundation, and the Schwules Museum. Work by Langberg is currently on view in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Natural Portrait Gallery, London, and is also in collections including the Baltimore Museum of Art, Crystal Bridges, Bentonville, the High Museum of Art, the ICA Boston, the ICA Miami, the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Geneva, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts Museum, the Rennie Museum, Vancouver, and the Rubell Museum, Miami. Notably for me, Doron's work is in the permanent collection of the RISD Museum, where I first encountered it in their 2021 exhibition, Any Distance Between Us. Since that point, I've only become more enamored by Langberg's work, and when Heather contacted me to make speaker recommendations, I thought I was being too aspirational when I requested Doron to speak. Suffice to say, I am so excited to hear tonight's presentation. So join me in welcoming tonight's guest lecturer, Doron Langberg.
Hi. Thank you, Charlie. That was really beautiful and touching. And I'm really excited to be here. Thank you guys for inviting me and thinking about me. Just putting an alarm. Okay. So I'm just gonna give a kind of introduction to the kind of basic elements of my practice, and then I'm going to focus on 3 projects that I want to share with you. So my work in general, kind of like Charlie was saying, focuses on people in my immediate environment. So my family, my friends, my partner, and the landscape around me as well. And for me, kind of focusing on these different kinds of imagery, whether it's very intimate imagery, sexual imagery, more casual imagery, is a way to create kind of a continuum of experience that we can all share in. And I think a lot about how color and touch and materiality can create an emotional experience, and how the kind of formal elements of a painting and the subject of the paintings can kind of create meaning together. So I'm going to start around 2020. This is a painting of my partner sleeping. And with this, I was thinking about the kind of rainbow color structure. And for me, seeing a rainbow kind of in the world is a moment where kind of everything stops, and I feel more in my body, and I feel more connected to my environment. And to me, that was paralleled moments in my relationship where my love for my partner was most felt. Again, kind of quieting the the rush of everyday life, and allowed me to focus on our connection. So I wanted to kind of put those two, this color idea and this image idea together in this painting. Also, I really hate public speaking, so I'm quite nervous. So bear with me. But this is another painting from 2020. It's called Drawing Mike, and this is one of the first paintings that I made that are set in Fire Island, which is kind of a recurring theme in my work. And if you guys don't know, Fire Island is an island off of Long Island in New York, kind of like a sandbar on the Atlantic. And there's many communities, but there's 2 queer communities. One is the Pines, and the other one is Cherry Grove. And between those 2 communities, there's this like wooded duney area called the Meat Rack, which is it's very beautiful, and also kind of this like cruisy, sexy area. And for me, going to Fire Island, when I went for the first time, it was kind of like I felt like a huge weight off of my shoulders, as if I kind of like left heteronormative society and entered into this like gay paradise. So I think that for me, I really wanted to capture that sense of freedom with this painting. So I think that like the kind of areas of empty canvas and the sweeping brushstrokes, to me was a way to kind of try to achieve that. And with the figures, I was thinking about Manet group portraits, where there is some sort of narrative, but it's quite loose, and there's no, each figure still kind of exists fully as themselves with kind of a fully formed interiority. So that was, again, kind of thinking about how that space really allowed me to feel like myself and be with others. And then just a word about my process. So I mostly work from observation. So I would have this is, I think, the piece actually at RISD, yeah. So I would have an image idea based on an experience that I had, and then I would invite the people that I'm thinking about painting back into my studio, and I do these observational portraits that then kind of become source material for larger works, and also kind of opportunities to hash out like color idea and materiality, and they're quite spontaneous and fast, like they take maybe an hour or so. So I want to also talk about my explicit paintings, which is kind of a thread that runs from the very beginning of my practice. And really, I feel like kind of when I first started working with this subject matter, maybe in like 2009 as an undergrad, it was really the first time where I felt like I was kind of capturing something that was my own, like using subject matter that felt very personal, and also the first time where the materiality and the subject came together in a way that felt particularly meaningful. So I think this kind of like alchemic moment of the subject and the handling was really kind of tied to very foundational elements in my practice. And I feel like when I started making explicit work, I didn't fully understand why I was compelled to make it. Obviously, being queer and wanting to express queer imagery was part of it, but I think that for me, kind of as I was making it, I came to realize that a lot of it was about bridging a certain gap between the depth of the experience that I had and how meaningful these like sexual experiences were, versus how narrow the space felt for queer imagery in the outside world. And I think if you think of the history of painting, it's so authored by straight desire. And I think like, thinking about The Origin of the World by Courbet or Liberty Leading the People by Delacroix, the idea of their desire can come, to represent freedom, creation, God. There's like an endless breadth of or range of metaphorical meaning that could come from straight desire, whereas I felt with queer desire, it can only really represent the thing that it's depicting. So I feel like that was kind of my process in thinking about trying to, paint these images with a lot of care and consideration and emotionality in order to kind of try to vie for the kind of gravity that straight sexual imagery has within art history. And also I feel like there's something about queer sexuality that's also very sensationalized. So I wanted to kind of create a very casual, everyday version of it that is both explicit and uncompromising, but also pretty straightforward and could relate to people's everyday experiences. So this is the summer of 2020, and I kind of packed my French easel and went to Fire Island with kind of painting materials for the first time and just painted my friends there. So this is Carlos and John Arthur. This is Edgar and Olive, the doggy. This is my friend Joe. And in a way, I feel like this is the first time that I was painting people not in the neutral space of like my apartment or my studio, or their apartment. And in a way, it took me a long time to kind of realize this because it wasn't something I was thinking about in the moment, but painting in a space that already had meaning, like Fire Island, that kind of is this very queer space, allowed for this kind of a different connection between the people I was painting and the space they were in, and really kind of expanded the possibility of the subject matter I was working with. Like suddenly, I could look at a flower and it would make sense. Like before that point, I feel like I was like, oh, I'm dealing with my queer identity. I can only paint like guys fucking or whatever. Like I feel like I didn't allow myself to look at other subject matter and still trust that it could have meaning. But then within this process of kind of connecting working with spaces that have their own meaning, I feel like was really kind of important to me. So I'm gonna try kind of go back a little to before the pandemic. So this is a painting of my sister from an old photo, and she sadly passed away right before the pandemic. And for me, that was obviously a very difficult moment. That kind of introduced, up until that point, I think the strongest experience that I had in my life were, my love for my partner, sexual desire, connection with friends, and this experience of loss kind of introduced a new experience that was equally overwhelming. So in this point, I was already starting to work on my solo show with Victoria Miro, my first show, which was called, oh my God, what was it called? Give Me Love, and was in 2021. So kind of some of these paintings I'm going to show you all kind of culminated in that show. So when we were in Israel for the funeral, we were sitting Shiva, which is this like traditional period of mourning in Judaism that lasts for 7 days. And my brothers and I would go hiking in the mountains near where my parents live, which we live in like the valley, so we're kind of like surrounded by these beautiful mountains. And when we were hiking, we saw this field of flowers, which, funnily enough, having been there so many times and growing up there, we didn't encounter before. So to me, there was something kind of almost, this was such an emotional time. It was almost like a spiritual moment of kind of encountering maybe, the spirit of my sister like through these flowers. And for this painting, I kind of took guidance from Munch in terms of how to deal with the landscape. So both in terms of the palette and kind of these like swirls that he uses in many of his landscape painting to express emotional turmoil. So sharp transition. So I feel like during the pandemic, both kind of dealing, with the world shutting down, people being sick all around us, and my sister passing, I think that I was kind of in a very existential state. And for this show that I was working on, I wanted these experiences I wanted to describe these experiences of loss and mourning, but also kind of have this like life force counterpart, kind of this like life and death balance. So this is one of two paintings. This is like 8 feet tall, and it's very abstract when you see it in person, but kind of very material, very sensual kind of engagement with paint. And also, I don't know if you can tell, but there's like 3 sets of hands. So the painting is called Friends, and it's kind of like a nod to the fluidity of queer friendship. And then Bather, which was a homage to Bonnard and his like bathtub paintings of his wife, Marta. So this, to me, was very much like a pandemic, like a deep pandemic painting where like all the kind of all of our social world and our emotional world was condensed into our domestic sphere. And then finally, I was able to, after more than a year, I was able to go back home to Israel to visit my family after kind of like being locked out of the country. And I also brought my like canvases and paint and painted the landscape there and my family. My mom. And this kind of coming back to studio, I painted another big landscape of Yokneam. But when I returned, it was kind of like high spring and everything, all the flowers were blooming, everything was green. So I kind of wanted to use that as like kind of this rebirth metaphor, but still have it feel like very heavy from the texture and the paint handling, as this kind of memory of essentially these more difficult experiences. And also thinking about Van Gogh and the cypresses as a marker of death. And then this is the last painting that I made for that show, which was kind of this like cathartic moment of release after this very difficult year. So and this is the two of the studies that I made for it. And this is some install shots for scale. So I'm going to show you some kind of images that didn't go into any particular big project, but just like work that I want to share with you guys. So this is a painting that was commissioned by the Frick in New York. They had moved out of their mansion into the old Whitney, essentially, and finally were able to lend pieces from their collection. So a few of their, key pieces were traveling, and the curator, Xavier, asked me and a bunch of other queer artists to make work in response to the missing pieces. And this is maybe one of the coolest things that has ever happened to me, so I'm compelled to share. But yeah, that was a really intense moment, facing off with Holbein. And then I was working on the show at the Rubell Museum as well during this time. And these are some of the paintings. These are all 8 feet tall. And some installation shots. This was part of a project for Freeze LA. And this is the painting that's now currently at the Met, which for me was a life-changing experience to be able to share my work in a space that I've admired for so long. And for me, this painting really was kind of a combination of this way of working that I was trying to achieve, in the sense of having this fluidity combined with areas of kind of clarity and rendering. And I feel like and I was very happy with it at the time when I was painting it. And I think once that was kind of like affirmed on that level, almost helped me let go of that. And I was like, okay, like this chapter is kind of ending, and now I'm kind of like ready to ask more of myself and ask more of my paintings, and maybe not rely so heavily on this like perfection of mark making, or the freshness or the fluidity. Like I kind of felt that I needed to kind of search elsewhere for meaning, in terms like painterly meaning. And that kind of brings me to the second project I wanted to share with you. So this is my most recent show that was at Victoria Miro, called Night, and it was earlier, it was a year ago, exactly. It was like February last year. And essentially, like, since, okay, I'm gonna drink water now. Good time for a sip of water. So after kind of the pandemic wound down, I started going out a lot more in the city, which for me, I feel like when I was in my 20s, I didn't do anything. I was painting in my studio. So it was kind of a way to access all these things that I didn't really know existed. And it became very kind of a big part of my life and very transformative. So this painting is called Merge, and it's named after a party called Merge in New York that happens a few times a year. And I think that what made Merge really special was that kind of parallel to the experience I had in Fire Island, where I just felt so free, and I felt that the people around me were also really allowing themselves, just really expressing themselves in the way that they want to be. And it felt, just in terms of sexuality and gender, was almost kind of this like utopian space. And I really had very powerful experiences with friends, good friends, and my partner within these spaces. And one second. But in a way, like I was saying before, like the way that they were painted, or these images kind of required a totally different way of painting. I think for me, I was used to relying on like the white of the canvas, for example, and using transparent pigments in order to kind of arrive at the color structure that I was using. Whereas here it's, interiors of clubs, like it has to be pretty dark. So even the idea of like, what does it mean to make a dark painting, which in retrospect sounds like a pretty simple question, was very, very challenging. And also just like the sheer size of them. So this is two of these 96 by 80 canvases, so 160 by 96. And then also, subject matter-wise, a lot of those spaces, because they're illegal, don't allow any kind of documentation. So I had to rely a lot on my own memory of things, and then kind of like try to recreate it at studio. So for this, actually, I invited a bunch of friends separately, and they each kind of like danced for me, and I like took pictures, and so it was kind of, it was fun challenges involved in making it. But I feel like as I was working on it, part of me was also like, I kind of felt that it was a departure from my previous subject matter, which I felt had a more like universal appeal, whereas this kind of so few people have this exact experience. And it felt like I was talking kind of more directly to my community, and I didn't really know, like I almost didn't know if on one hand, if I'm allowed to share these moments, and on the other hand, would people just not care or think that this is just like hedonistic and silly, like where's the depth? And I think that it kind of dawned on me that that's maybe the project, that I feel like these experiences are so important to me, and I felt, so transformed by them. How can I paint it in a way that could communicate that to a viewer through the materiality of the painting? And this painting is called Basement, which is this like iconic venue in New York. And I don't know if you can tell, but this is Oscar Yee Howe, who's another painter. This is Constance Tenvik, Oren Pinhasi. Like, these are all kind of other artists that I'm friends with that are in my community. And I feel like these spaces are such beautiful, like, meeting places where we kind of all come together, which was also surprising for me. So again, the nature of these experiences is much more explicit than what I had described before in my work. But I really felt like so this painting, for example, is called Wrecked, and it's based on this party that happens once a month called Wrecked at Basement. And Wrecked is a very kind of one of the more sexy parties, I would say. And one of the spaces is essentially like a pulsating dark room. And I kind of like thinking about these very, very sexually charged spaces almost as like the engine of the party and where all the energy kind of emanates from. And I really wanted to try and capture the intensity of it. And this is another darkroom painting. So this is the darkroom at the underwear party in Fire Island, which is this weekly party every Friday that happens in Cherry Grove with a very robust, I would say, darkroom. And with this painting, I wanted to kind of communicate just the feeling of moving through the space and moving through people and touching them and being touched. And I was using my hands to put the paint on almost kind of didactically in order to kind of mimic the sensation that I'm talking about. And then as I was working on these, it kind of also became clear that it wouldn't be a complete experience without kind of this like blissful post-party come down. So this is a painting called The Walk Back. It's actually the largest painting that I made at that point, and it's 3 of these canvases, so 240 inches by 96 inches. And it was pretty rough, I have to say, to make this painting. It was quite challenging. I think mainly because of the scale of it. But I really wanted, like after the underwear party, when walking back from Cherry Grove to the Pines, you walk through the meat rack at night, and kind of from all the chaos, you immediately emerge into this like very peaceful space. But kind of still very charged from the party experience. So I wanted it to be both like very peaceful and dark, but also clearly kind of humming with a sense of life. So again, that was to me, like felt very challenging. So there's like maybe like 5 different paintings under this painting. And these are just the individual panels. And kind of continuing on with the night into morning, this is sunrise. And this is morning on the beach, which is kind of, after staying up all night and just experiencing the late morning sun. And these are some installation shots. Okay, so this is the 3rd project that I want to talk to you guys about, which is what I'm working on now. Okay. So while working on the night show, which again was kind of like opened in February 2024, like towards the end of my process, the war in Israel started, and it was, it was really quite devastating, and it felt that overnight, my entire world kind of reorganized itself around the conflict, and I felt like I felt the intensity of the political moment as much in New York through my community of artist friends as I did talking to my family in Israel. So I feel like it was just kind of all-encompassing, like both ends of my world were just kind of completely engulfed. And I feel like, October 7th was a nightmare that came true. But for me, it was really just watching the unfolding horrors that were happening in Gaza that really broke me, and I felt both implicated and helpless at the same time. And the night show was a huge deadline, and then there were 2 other shows happening at the same time. My museum show in Rotterdam and a show of flowers in Venice. So it was kind of this combination of deadline and also just feeling completely disconnected, that essentially everything my entire subject matter and everything that I was working on just felt completely meaningless. Or not meaningless, just inaccessible. Like, how can I continue painting like my friends and parties, like when this, when what I'm thinking about and what I'm feeling is so completely different. And I really felt kind of, a break from my work, which was maybe the first time ever. And that I just didn't have the tools to kind of deal with what was happening. And just a little bit of kind of background. I left Israel when I was 21 to study painting in Philly. And it was also, I think, for me, a way to kind of escape the conflict, because I really did not want to engage with it, and I wanted to create work in a different context, like away from that political context, because it felt very suffocating. But I feel like once the war started, it was just inescapable. It's like the conflict came to me. And in order to kind of move forward, both in my life and in my studio, I had to confront it and engage with it, which was and is very scary to me, at least. So this painting essentially came after months of not really being able to work, and I made it last summer. And these are just kind of like shrubs outside of my parents' house in Israel. And I was thinking about Van Gogh and Munch and how they're able to use landscape as a way to access like the deepest, darkest parts of human experience. And I felt like there was something there for me. That painting landscape from observation gave me a concrete and relevant subject matter, but also kind of allowed space for so many of the things that are just completely incomprehensible to me about this conflict. So that was it kind of opened the door to this new body of work that I'm thinking about. And just like a little bit of background about my family. So my dad was born during World War II in Drohobych, which is this town in western Ukraine, which used to be Poland at the time. And you know, like all these stories, it's kind of this insane kind of, you know, turn of events where my grandmother hid him in a monastery when he was a few months old, and she herself hid in like an attic of like a Polish farmer. And then when the war ended, she kidnapped him, and most of their family was murdered. The ones who survived kind of scattered. So her and my dad came to Israel. So for me, the Holocaust is kind of very ever present, and I experience it as this like very intimate, personal experience. But I think when the war started, it became more and more of a rallying cry, an ideological rallying cry for both ideologies. Never again versus never again for anyone. And you know, I feel like in these 15 months, kind of the main questions that come to my mind is how do I relate to my home? How do I relate to my family? How do I relate to the landscape that is etched so deeply inside of me? And ultimately, how do I relate to myself when this horror is taking place? And another question is, what does it mean to be Jewish and to come from so much loss and so much pain and see it being used to cause more pain? So to me, those, you know, kind of questions were haunting me, and I was trying to find answers for them, or at least represent them through painting. So this past fall, I actually went back to Drohobych in Ukraine with canvases, and I painted the forest that was outside of Drohobych, which 13,000 Jews were murdered in, including some of my family. I'm assuming, we actually don't really know, but where else would they have gone? So these are some of the paintings from Ukraine. And then also, I went to Israel again, and kind of painted the landscape with these questions in mind. So this was maybe December. And so since then, I've been at studio, and basically the idea is to kind of take the Ukraine paintings and take the Israel paintings, and also maybe some paintings depicting Fire Island as well, and work on this like body of work of very large paintings of landscape. So this is the first one was I showed you earlier, and then this is the second Israel painting that I'm working on now, which is kind of it's hard to see, but it comes from these two. You can kind of see the mountain ridge in the distance. And that's it. Those are my current thoughts. Do you guys have questions?
Hi.
Hi.
I think the scale of these works is really wonderful, and I was wondering if how you think about that and kind of how that plays into your practice, and whether or not the works with people in them versus works that are kind of purely in your painting that in plein air, out with kind of nature, how kind of you incorporate that and think about it.
In terms of the size?
And yeah, in scale, kind of throughout.
They're basically life size. I feel like that's kind of my way of thinking about it. So if it's like a head, it's going to be this big, and if it's a landscape, it's going to be really big. Yeah, I think that's kind of, to me, I feel like working big somehow has always been in my language. Even when I was like really young, I would make murals, and in undergrad, I would make very large paintings. So I think it's just something that made sense to me. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm curious about the work that you're currently doing. I feel like there's a lot of expectation for art to both be like a personal process and like processing your own emotions, but also to be used as like a statement on society or for like advocacy and all those things. And I'm curious about how maybe like if you've thought about that or how that like goes into your practice at all.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, like choosing to work with landscape in a way, I think was like, I think part of the idea was that it's hard to pin down what it means, that the meaning is fugitive on one hand, but on the other hand, it's very expressive and emotional. And I think that painting, in a sense, like when you make a painting, you make it's like 500,000 decisions, essentially. So I think whatever subject you're choosing to paint, or that I choose to paint, I'm really being brought to task by the painting to kind of say what I mean. And that every decision has to relate to a certain feeling or a certain idea. And I think that the process of making the painting kind of is the process of working through these feelings and working through these ideologies. And I think that I found myself in the beginning of the war, like very desperate to say something ideological that would make sense, that would kind of contain both things that I know in my heart, morally and emotionally, and kind of the reality on the ground, which is very difficult. And I couldn't paint. Like, I feel like I didn't, that's not the kind of painter I am, you know what I mean? Even painting like gay sex, like it's not a political, ideological statement. It's a statement about what is. So I think kind of similarly, I had to come to terms with my own inability of making work that had like this complete ideology, because I couldn't, it just is not what, I don't know if that answers your.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I was just interested by all your paintings are very saturated in color.
Yeah.
And I just want to know how you think about color and the ways in which it works in your process of thinking about how you want a painting to glow. Yeah.
Thank you. So color, I feel like, is something that is very important for me in my paintings. And I kind of think of it, I think of like the drawing aspect, the kind of naturalistic drawing language, as maybe being something that's like rooted in reality and our observational experience. And then the color is kind of expressing some sort of like emotional undercurrent. So I think that to me, it's important to have kind of both. So like the chroma is kind of this like departure from naturalism that talks about kind of the things that we can't see and that we can't depict by working observationally. And I think that the color ideas themselves like sometimes come from, like, oh, the rainbow and wanting to equate it with a certain experience. Sometimes it comes from a physical experience, like, thinking about how would I represent warmth or, I think it's something that feels more like intuitive, sadly. I know this is not a very descriptive way of talking about color, yeah.
It's a little tall for me, whatever. Hello, thank you. I was really interested in that, well, yeah, everything's so great, thank you so much. And I was really interested in that one painting you made. It was like a landscape, and you said there was like 5 paintings underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
And, as an artist, like, how do you make that decision to like start over? Like, what's going on? Like, do you scrape it off and start from scratch, or do you let it build up? Like, I'm interested in how you basically navigate those decisions when it's not going the way you want to, and what do you do next?
Yeah, that painting was really torturous because it was also like the biggest painting in my show, and I was working on it for a while, and it was pretty mediocre. And I had a good friend at the studio, and I was like, "What do you think? Like, do you think it's done?" Like, and he was like, "Yeah, it could be done. It's okay. It's an okay painting." And I was like, "Okay, well, we don't talk about finished paintings, like blah blah." I was just like, "Okay." And then I went back home and I asked my partner, I was like, "What do you think about this painting? Like, do you think it's a good painting? It's the biggest painting in the show. Like, it needs to be really strong." And he was like, "Yeah, it's maybe you can work on it a little bit." So I feel like it was kind of this like slow crash towards like, okay, this is not a finished painting. And it was too boring. It was too dark. Like, I needed to kind of like breathe some life into it. And also, I think I realized that because there were like, here, let's see if I can find it. Basically here, there were 2 other figures underneath that I removed. So I think that making that decision really helped. And that really took a day. Like, it was after like 3 months of working on it, I was like, okay, fuck this part, and I'm just gonna repaint it. And I think when things start to fall into place, it becomes much easier. So I think it was more about the decision to, like sitting with it and just realizing, yeah, it's just not good enough, and I have to keep working on it. And it felt like a risk. That's like, oh, what if this whole painting fails? But it's better to. It's like at some point you just have to trust yourself and be like, okay, it's not gonna fail. Like, it's gonna be at least mediocre. So, so that was my thinking about it.
Hello, thank you for coming here. As someone who does art as well, how do you like stay motivated post-school? I've had like some intermittent, like, oh, I'm at school, I'm taking a break kind of stuff, and I find that when I'm not externally motivated, it's like really hard to be like generating like meaningful art or like things that are even necessarily good. So like, how do you self-motivate in that way?
That's a good question. I think that a deadline helps, for sure. And I think that magical things kind of happen in these compressed time periods where you have to produce. And I think that, like right now, for example, I'm not on deadline. And I've kind of took, the last few months to develop these ideas. And I think that I wouldn't have arrived at them if I was really, if I had to continue with like show schedules. So I think that sometimes studio can feel really unproductive. And you can go and you can feel like you're just wasting your time and like, what did I do today? Like 5 brushstrokes or whatever. But again, I think that there's, like at some point you just have to trust that whatever is happening beneath the surface is like still, things are still happening even though paintings are not coming out. and that at some point there will be a moment where you'll see like kind of the fruit of that labor, this invisible labor. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I think that like it's hard to, you really have to kind of, especially when you're younger, like really structure your life around making work, and basically every decision you make in terms of like where you live and where you, you know, like where's your job and what kind of job you take and how many hours you're gonna work and how many hours you're gonna paint, like really has to revolve around wanting to have that studio practice. And it's also kind of a test to like how much do you want it, you know what I mean? Because there's a lot of, I don't want to say sacrifices, because I felt like, you know, these were decisions that I was happy to make, but there's definitely decisions to be made. So I think that, yeah, it's more kind of like creating optimal conditions for you to be productive, if that makes sense, yeah.
Hi, thanks for your talk. Curious about, I guess mostly in regards to the nightclub and darkroom paintings, how you go about like translating these very ephemeral moment experience-based memories into like one frame of a painting. Like, are you thinking about the painting in the darkroom space? Like, is that like, does that bleed into your lived experience, or is it really about like later in the studio, like pulling from memory, pulling from your friends and people? Yeah.
Totally. No, that's a great question. I think once I started making paintings of parties, I would go to parties thinking about painting. So I would be like, okay, like this, like what can I paint? Like, oh, this area or this couple, or so kind of collecting subject matter in your mind. And it's funny because I had a student come into my studio, or like a former student that like happened to be in my building, and it was the painting. It was this painting. Where are you? It was this painting, and he was like, "God, do you always think about sex?" And I was like, possibly, but I also always think about painting. So I feel like this idea that like just this, you know, kind of having your painting brain on at all times and collecting ideas, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for sharing your work. I have a question that predominantly pertains to the second set of work that you shared, the same ones that was just mentioned about the clubs. I guess the question I have is about risk and intention. Specifically with those paintings, I feel like I see a departure visually and in terms of, you know, the opacity of it and the clustering of the figures and the way things are kind of on top of each other in a much less kind of ephemeral way than some of the other work. I see, in some ways, ironic because there's a greater concentration of things, like a greater sense of risk and tension. And I was wondering if you could speak to that, whether in that set of work or your work in general, both in the process and in the way you reflect on the work you've made, and yeah.
Risk, you mean in deciding to paint in a different way, or?
Yeah, like that, but you know, in terms of the physical method of painting, but then also just the way that you might look at these paintings and interpret them, like upon reflection or thinking back. I don't even know if that's a sensible thing to ask.
I guess to me, and maybe I don't know if I'm understanding perfectly, but I think there's so much momentum in kind of the way that I do things, for example, and I think that it definitely, in the sense that like, how would I explain it? Yeah, I mean, I think that to me it's important, I guess maybe to rephrase, it's important that every body of work feels different. So I think that there's kind of like this inherent level of risk and not knowing that comes with starting like working with a new subject matter or working with like a new set of like feelings or ideas. But to me, that's so inherent to what keeps me engaged at studio. So I think that's also very like, it feels, it feels like, am I just like throwing away all these, like, what am I doing? Like, is this gonna like ruin my career? But at the same time, that's what keeps me engaged. I don't know if that's what you asked, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank you.